Welcome to Illustrator CS6 Essentials. Illustrator can be used to create many types of artwork. In this lesson, you'll use the shape tools, work with basic selection techniques, and assemble some artwork using object stacking order. Along the way, you'll learn some helpful tips for creating artwork on your own. So in this video, I'm going to show you some things that you might think are relatively simple, but when you're working in Illustrator, there are some techniques that you should use that you might not be aware of. So I'll start out with some simple items and then move on down. I am starting out with a new document and I'm just selecting File, New, and I'm selecting the print profile as a default for this. And that just sets up my size for letter size and my measurements. And I am going to change my measurements to inches and click OK. So I have this new blank document open and I'm going to go select a tool. I'm selecting the rectangle tool. I click on it in the tools panel and then I click and drag. And I'm just creating any random size right now. What I want you to see is that if I take the selection tool, of course I can move this shape wherever I want, but I also have these handles on here as well. And if I click on that bottom handle, I can make this shape taller or shorter, or take the middle handle to the side and make this wider or less wide. You'll also see that if I grab a corner that I can change both sides at the same time. The other thing I want you to note is that if I take the rectangle tool and I click once out on the artboard, I can also go in and enter an exact amount. So if I want a rectangle that's 1, tab 1, I can click OK and have an exact rectangle to the size that I want. The other thing that I can do is select a shape that's already pre-existing, go under Window and pull up the Transform panel. In here, I can also set up a size. But I want you to note one thing, first of all. You see there's a reference point over here on the left of the Transform panel. It's on the center point right now. If I click in the upper left-hand corner, I have now changed the reference point to this point in this selected rectangle, which means that I can enter an exact value, maybe enter 2 by 2 in here, and press the tab again. You'll see that this corner here is exactly positioned at 2 inches by 2 inches. I'll bring up the ruler by pressing Command R or Control R so you can see that a little bit better. You'll also see that if I need to change the size of my selected shape, I can also use the width and height inside the Transform panel. So I'll go ahead in here and I'll type 2 by 2 and then hit the tab again. And so you can see that by using the rectangle tool, you can click and drag and make any shape visually. You can click once out on the artboard and enter a value, or you can select an existing shape and use the Transform panel. I'm going to move in to creating another shape. So notice that this rectangle has a little triangle in the lower right-hand corner. This indicates that there are other hidden tools inside the rectangle tool. I'm selecting the star tool. And notice that I can click and drag and make a star, and it's 5 points as a default. And I just visually created the size. But notice when I click on the artboard that I can set 2 different radiuses for the outside and inside of my star and also how many points I have. I'm going to go ahead and change radius 1 to 1.5. I've already set my document to be inches, so I don't have to type the IN. I'm hitting the tab key and I'm setting my radius 2 to be 2 inches. And then I'm pressing the tab key and typing in 15 for points and clicking OK. And you'll see that now I have a much different star. If I want to create other shapes, like for instance a circle, I can even take these tools, and if I click and drag and I hold the Shift key down, I can constrain them to be perfect circles or perfect squares. So you'll notice if I go back to rectangle and Shift click and drag that I'm constraining this to be a square. So hopefully that helps you with creating shapes. I'm going to move into a little bit about selections. I'm going to close Untitled 2, and I'm not going to save it. I don't need to. It was just a practice file. I'm selecting File, Browse and Bridge, and this opens up Adobe Bridge, where I can easily select my files. I've navigated out to the desktop where I have my AI03 lessons files, and I'm going to open up a file called AI0302. I'm pressing Command or Control 0 so that I can quickly and easily see everything on this page. You'll notice that if I take my selection tool and I cross over the top, that I can't select this item. This fish has been locked down. But if I cross over the bottom, you can see highlights show me items that are selectable, and that I can click and drag these items around using the solid selection tool. Now, if I'm moving an entire object, I would take the solid selection tool and I would click and drag the item around. If I want to change the shape of something, I would take my direct selection tool and I would click and drag over 1 point or 2 points in particular and click and drag just that one anchor point. So you'll notice that when I use that direct selection tool, I can come in here and I can click on 1 point, shift click on additional ones to add them to the selection, and then click and drag and they move together. Or of course, just take one. You'll also see that with my selection tool, I can click and drag to create a marquee to select multiple objects. So if I go back to my selection tool and I click and drag over the fins of the fish, you'll see that I selected everything that marquee touched. If I hold my shift key down, I can also deselect items that are already selected. I have these fins selected and they are always going to stay in the same position. So I'm going to go up to Object and group those together. And you'll see that when I click off to deselect and click back on, that they always become selected at the same time. You'll also see that I have up here in the direct selection tool, I have a group selection tool. And if I click off to deselect and click on one of the items in the group, I can still move that one item individually. But if I click on that one item again, it selects the rest of the items in the group. I'm going back to the solid selection tool and I'm just going to go ahead and put this fish together. So you notice that I'm just sliding these parts around to create my fish. Yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You should just use this to practice moving objects around with the selection tools. In this lesson, you discovered how to make shapes and how to use your selection tools.